Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates painted their nails and talked about boys, she spent her afternoons at the gym, pushing her body to its limits. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that strength came from within, and she carried that lesson with her everywhere she went. The day she announced her intention to join the Navy SEALs, the reaction was swift and brutal. Her high school classmates laughed openly in the hallways. Teachers shook their heads with disapproving looks. Even some family members questioned her sanity. The local newspaper ran a small story about the misguided girl who thought she could play soldier. "You're too small," her gym teacher told her during lunch. "SEALs need real strength, not whatever you think you have." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned early that words were cheap. Actions spoke louder than anything else ever could. The recruitment office was filled with young men when Sarah walked in. The recruiter, a weathered man with kind eyes, looked surprised to see her. He explained the process, the requirements, and the brutal reality of SEAL training. Many strong men had tried and failed. The failure rate was over 80%. "Are you sure about this, miss?" he asked gently. "There are other ways to serve your country." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure." The months leading up to her departure were filled with intense preparation. Sarah woke up at 4 every morning to run 5 miles before school. She spent her evenings at the local pool, swimming laps until her arms felt like lead. She studied military history, tactics, and survival techniques until her eyes burned from exhaustion. Her classmates continued their mockery. They called her names in the hallways and made jokes about her playing dress-up as a soldier. Some of the boys would flex their muscles when she walked by, laughing about how she could never match their strength. Sarah's mother worried constantly. She would watch her daughter push herself to dangerous limits, eating military rations for breakfast and sleeping on the floor to prepare for the hardship ahead. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she would say softly. But Sarah knew she did. She was proving something to herself. The day before she left for basic training, Sarah stood in her bedroom looking at the posters of female athletes and warriors she had collected over the years. Each face represented someone who had been told they couldn't do something because of their gender. Each one had proven their doubters wrong. Her phone buzzed with messages from classmates. Most were sarcastic good luck wishes with predictions that she would be back home within a week, crying and defeated. A few were genuine, from the small group of friends who had always believed in her dreams. Sarah's father found her sitting on her bed that evening, staring at her packed bag. He sat beside her, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "You know what you're walking into," he said quietly. "It's going to be harder than anything you've ever faced." She nodded. "I know. They're going to try to break you, not just physically, but mentally. They'll tell you that you don't belong, that you're weak, that you should quit and go home." Sarah looked at him with determined eyes. "What did you do when they tried to break you?" Her father smiled slightly. "I remembered who I was and why I was there. You're not going there to prove anything to the people in this town. You're going there because it's who you are." The next morning, Sarah stood at the bus station with a small group of other recruits. Most were young men, all nervous energy and bravado. They looked at her with curiosity and barely hidden skepticism. She could hear their whispered conversations about whether she would make it through the first day. The bus ride to the naval base was long and quiet. Sarah stared out the window at the changing landscape, thinking about all the people who had told her she was crazy. She thought about her classmates who were probably sleeping in that morning, preparing for another ordinary day at school. She thought about the comfortable life she was leaving behind for something unknown and dangerous. When they arrived at the base, the reality of her decision hit her like a physical blow. The place was massive, intimidating, and filled with serious-looking military personnel. The other recruits suddenly seemed very young and very scared. A drill instructor appeared, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. He looked at each recruit with cold, assessing eyes. When his gaze landed on Sarah, it lingered for a moment longer than the others. "So," he said, his voice carrying across the group, "we have a special recruit today, someone who thinks the movies got it right about women in combat." The other recruits shifted uncomfortably. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her expression calm. "Let me tell you something," the instructor continued, walking slowly around the group. "This isn't a game. This isn't about equality or proving points. This is about life and death. about brotherhood forged in blood and sweat, about becoming something more than human. He stopped in front of Sarah. You think you belong here? Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. We'll see about that. As they were led to their barracks, Sarah could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every doubtful look. She was the only woman among 43 men, and everyone seemed to be waiting for her to crack under the pressure. That night, lying on her narrow bunk, Sarah listened to the nervous chatter of her fellow recruits. Some talked about girlfriends back home. Others boasted about their athletic achievements. A few expressed doubts about whether they could handle what was coming. Sarah said nothing. She closed her eyes and thought about her father's words. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone else. She was there because it was who she was meant to be. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. Tomorrow they would try to break her down and build her back up into something stronger. Tomorrow she would begin the journey that would either destroy her or forge her into something unbreakable. As sleep finally took her, Sarah's last thought was of her hometown and all the people who said she would never make it. She smiled slightly in the darkness. They had no idea what they had helped create. The first week of training nearly killed her. Sarah had thought she was prepared, but nothing could have readied her for the relentless assault on both body and mind that SEAL training demanded. The instructors seemed to take special pleasure in pushing her harder than anyone else. Martinez! Instructor Johnson's voice cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Sarah struggled through her 100th push-up of the morning. You're holding up the entire team. Maybe you should consider a nice desk job instead. Around her, the other recruits continued their exercises, some shooting sympathetic glances her way. Others clearly annoyed that she was drawing extra attention to their group. Sarah's arms trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself through 10 more push-ups before collapsing. The physical challenges were brutal, but the psychological warfare was worse. Every day brought new attempts to break her spirit. Instructors would make comments about her place being in the kitchen, not the battlefield. They questioned whether her teammates could trust someone who might break under pressure when their lives depended on her. During the obstacle course runs, Sarah consistently finished in the middle of the pack, never last, but never first either. This seemed to frustrate the instructors more than if she had simply failed completely. They had expected her to quit by now, and her persistence was becoming an irritation. You're just delaying the inevitable, Instructor Davis told her after a particularly grueling day of water survival training. Save yourself the humiliation and ring the bell now. The bell sat at the center of their training compound, a simple brass bell that any recruit could ring at any time to end their suffering and go home. Every day, usually multiple times per day, someone would approach that bell. The sound of it ringing meant another dream had died. Another person had reached their breaking point. Sarah looked at the bell every day. During the worst moments when her body screamed for relief and her mind begged for mercy, she would stare at that brass surface and imagine how easy it would be to end the pain. One ring and she could go home to her warm bed, hot meals, and people who didn't spend every waking moment trying to destroy her. But she never rang it. The other recruits began to form opinions about her. Some respected her determination and began to see her as an equal. Others resented her presence, believing she was receiving special treatment or that the standards were being lowered to accommodate her. A few simply ignored her, focusing on their own survival. Marcus Thompson, a former college football player from Alabama, became an unexpected ally. During a break in training, he approached Sarah as she sat alone cleaning her rifle. You're tougher than most of these guys, he said quietly. Don't let them get in your head. Sarah looked up, surprised by the genuine respect in his voice. Thanks. My sister wanted to be a Marine, Marcus continued. Family talked her out of it, said it wasn't a woman's place. I always wondered what would have happened if she had stuck to her guns like you're doing. These moments of connection were rare and precious. Most of the time, Sarah felt completely isolated, fighting a battle that seemed designed specifically to defeat her. The instructors rotated their tactics, sometimes ignoring her completely, other times singling her out for brutal individual attention. The underwater training was the worst. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but the SEAL requirements pushed her beyond anything she had imagined. They had to swim underwater for impossible distances while solving problems and completing tasks. Several strong men had already washed out during this phase. During one session, Sarah found herself trapped under an obstacle, her air running low and panic beginning to set in. The water was murky, and she couldn't find the exit point. Her lungs burned as she searched desperately for a way out. For a moment, she considered shooting to the surface, which would mean automatic failure. It would be over. No more pain, no more humiliation, no more fighting against impossible odds. Instead, she forced herself to stop and think. Sarah closed. Her eyes controlled her breathing and methodically felt her way along the obstacle. Her training kicked in, and muscle memory guided her to the exit. When she finally surfaced, gasping and triumphant, Instructor Johnson was waiting. "Took you long enough," he said coldly. "Real SEALs don't hesitate." But Sarah caught something different in his eyes. Maybe it was respect, or maybe just surprise that she had made it through. Either way, she had survived another test. The weeks blended together in a haze of pain, exhaustion, and small victories. Sarah's body adapted, becoming stronger and more resilient than she had ever imagined possible. Her mind sharpened, learning to push through barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. But the constant pressure was taking its toll. She had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and her hands had developed permanent calluses and scars. At night, she often lay awake, wondering if she was losing herself in the process of becoming something else. Letters from home provided both comfort and additional pressure. Her mother wrote about how proud she was, but Sarah could read the worry between the lines. Her father's letters were shorter but more direct, reminding her that quitting was always an option if she decided this wasn't her path. Most painful were the messages from her former classmates. Some had heard about her progress and sent encouragement. Others had written her off entirely, assuming she had already failed and been sent home in shame. A few sent cruel messages, betting on how long she would last. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of combat training, Sarah found herself standing near the bell. She hadn't consciously walked there, but somehow her feet had carried her to the symbol of surrender. The brass surface gleamed in the fading sunlight, and she could almost hear it calling to her. Thinking about it, Instructor Johnson appeared beside her, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Sarah nodded honestly. "Every day." "Good," he said, surprising her. "The day you stop thinking about it is the day you become dangerous to your team. Fear keeps you sharp. Doubt keeps you human." He paused, looking at the bell himself. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen thousands of recruits come through here. Want to know what separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't?" Sarah waited. "It's not strength. It's not intelligence. It's not even determination." He looked at her directly. "It's the ability to find something bigger than your own suffering to fight for." That night, Sarah wrote letters to everyone who had doubted her. She didn't send them, but writing them helped clarify something in her mind. She wasn't fighting to prove them wrong anymore. She was fighting to prove herself right. She belonged here, not because someone had given her permission, but because she had earned her place through blood, sweat, and an unbreakable spirit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to break her will, and new opportunities to ring that bell and end her suffering. But Sarah Martinez was no longer the girl who had left Texas months ago. She was becoming something harder, something stronger, something that could not be broken by doubt or fear or pain. The instructors had tried to forge her in their fire, expecting her to melt. Instead, they were creating something unbreakable. The night they came for her, Sarah was exhausted from a 20-mile forced march through swampland. She had barely collapsed onto her bunk when the sound of boots on concrete echoed through the barracks. It was past midnight, well beyond normal training hours, which meant only one thing: trouble. 6 men in civilian clothes entered the sleeping quarters, their faces hidden by ski masks. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. These weren't instructors. Their movements were too careful, too coordinated. "Real threat. Sarah Martinez," one of them called out in a muffled voice. "Come with us." The other recruits stirred in their bunks, confusion and fear rippling through the room. Sarah sat up slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. This felt wrong, but challenging unknown authority could be part of the test. "Who's asking?" she replied, buying time to assess the situation. "Someone who doesn't like women playing soldier." The leader responded, "Move, now." That's when Sarah knew this wasn't official training. The language was wrong, the timing was wrong, and the hostile energy in the room felt genuinely dangerous. She glanced at Marcus, who was sitting up in the next bunk, his eyes wide with concern. "Call the MPs," she whispered to him as she stood up. The men surrounded her quickly, professional in their movements but carrying an undercurrent of personal anger that made Sarah's skin crawl. They escorted her out of the barracks and toward a waiting van, their grips on her arms tight enough to leave bruises. "This is kidnapping," Sarah said as they pushed her toward the vehicle. "This is justice," one of them replied. "You've embarrassed enough good men. Time to learn your place." The van ride lasted 2 hours through dark country roads. Sarah tried to memorize turns and landmarks, but the windows were covered, and her captors had bound her hands behind her back. They spoke quietly among themselves, discussing her like she wasn't there. "3 months she's been making fools of real warriors," one said. "Command won't do anything about it. Too worried about politics. We're saving the program, saving lives." Sarah realized these men genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. In their minds, she was a threat to military effectiveness, a weakness that would get people killed. That made them more dangerous than simple criminals because they thought their cause was righteous. The van stopped at what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Sarah was dragged inside and tied to a chair in a small windowless room. The concrete floor was stained with old oil and the air smelled of rust and decay. "Here's how this works," the leader said, removing his mask to reveal a weathered face with cold blue eyes. "You're going to write a letter explaining why you've decided to quit SEAL training. You're going to say it was too hard, that you realized you don't belong there. And if I don't, then you'll stay here until you change your mind, however long that takes." They left her alone in the dark room for what felt like hours. Sarah worked at her restraints, but they were too tight and professionally tied. Whoever these men were, they had training and experience with detaining people. The psychological pressure was immediate and intense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound could mean they were coming back. Sarah forced herself to control her breathing and think logically about her situation. These men were connected to the military somehow. They knew too much about her training schedule and had access to information about her progress. They might be former SEALs themselves, men who felt she was dishonoring their brotherhood by trying to join it. When they returned, they brought a video camera and a prepared statement. "Read this," the leader commanded, "and we'll drive you back to base. You can pack your things and go home with your dignity intact." Sarah looked at the paper. It was a resignation letter filled with language about realizing her limitations and accepting that some things were beyond women's capabilities. Every word was designed to reinforce the stereotype that had driven her to prove herself in the first place. "No," she said simply. The leader's face darkened. "You don't understand your situation. We can keep you here as long as necessary. No one knows where you are." "Marcus knows something happened," Sarah replied. "He'll report it." "Marcus Thompson washed out yesterday," one of the other men said with satisfaction. "Couldn't handle the pressure knowing his girlfriend might be in danger." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had been her strongest ally, and now he was gone because of her situation. These men were systematically destroying not just her chances, but anyone associated with her. "How many other recruits have you driven out?" she asked. "Enough," the leader replied. "We've been protecting the integrity of SEAL training for years, getting rid of the weak links before they can contaminate the real warriors." Sarah realized she was facing something bigger than personal harassment. This was an organized effort to maintain the status quo, to keep women out of elite military units through fear and intimidation. She wasn't their first victim, and she wouldn't be their last unless someone stopped them. "I'm not signing anything," she said firmly. They tried different approaches over the following days. Sometimes they left her alone in darkness for hours, letting isolation and uncertainty eat away at her resolve. Other times they played loud music or harsh noises to prevent sleep. They gave her minimal food and water, just enough to keep her alive but not enough to maintain her strength. The psychological torture was more sophisticated than simple physical abuse. They talked about her family, mentioning details about her parents and hometown that they shouldn't have known. They described other women who had tried military careers and failed. painting pictures of broken lives and shattered dreams. Sarah Martinez, the girl who thought she was special, one of them would say during their visits. Where's that sealed determination now? Where's the warrior spirit? But something unexpected happened during those dark hours of captivity. Instead of breaking down, Sarah began to understand something fundamental about herself. The pain, the fear, the isolation, none of it was worse than the years of being told she couldn't achieve her dreams. She had been preparing for this kind of test her entire life without realizing it. Every time someone had laughed at her ambitions, every time she had been told to give up and be realistic, every time she had faced doubt and kept pushing forward anyway, all of it had been training for this moment. Her captors thought they were breaking her, but they were actually proving that she was already unbreakable. On the fourth day, Sarah heard voices outside her room that sounded different from her captors. There was urgency in the tone, and she caught fragments of conversation about searches and investigations. Hope flickered in her chest. The door burst open and military police poured into the room, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Sarah's captors were on the ground in seconds, their carefully planned operation falling apart as law enforcement took control. Sarah Martinez, one of the MPs, approached her chair, his voice gentle. "We're here to get you out." As they cut her restraints and helped her to her feet, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and rage. She was safe, but the knowledge that this organization had been operating for years, destroying careers and crushing dreams, burned in her chest like acid. "How many others?" she asked the MP as they escorted her outside. "We're still investigating," he replied. "But you're the first one who didn't break. The first one who gave us enough time to find you." Sarah looked back at the warehouse as they loaded her into an ambulance. Her captors thought they had been teaching her about her limitations. Instead, they had taught her something far more valuable. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she was ready to become something they feared more than anything else. A woman who belonged exactly where she chose to be. The investigation that followed Sarah's rescue revealed a network of corruption that reached deeper into the military than anyone had imagined. Her captors were former Special Forces operatives who had been systematically sabotaging female recruits for over a decade, working with sympathizers inside various training programs to maintain male exclusivity in elite units. Sarah spent 3 days in the military hospital, recovering from dehydration and the physical toll of her captivity. The doctors were amazed by her resilience, noting that most people would have required weeks of recovery after such an ordeal. But Sarah's mind was focused on only one thing: getting back to training. "You don't have to continue," Colonel Patterson explained during his visit to her hospital room. He was the commanding officer overseeing the SEAL program, a stern man with kind eyes who had personally led the search for her. "After what you've been through, no one would question your decision to transfer to a different program." Sarah looked at him with clear, determined eyes. "With respect, sir, I didn't survive that warehouse just to quit when things got interesting." The colonel smiled slightly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. But you should know that your return will create complications. There are people who will see this incident as proof that women shouldn't be in combat roles. They'll argue that your presence created a security risk. And there are people who will see it as proof that women can handle anything thrown at them," Sarah replied. "I'd rather let my performance speak for itself." When Sarah returned to training, she found a dramatically changed environment. 7 instructors had been transferred or placed under investigation for their connections to the kidnapping ring. New protocols were in place to prevent unauthorized access to recruit information. Most significantly, the remaining recruits looked at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Some of her fellow trainees approached her with newfound respect. They had witnessed her abduction and knew she had endured days of captivity without breaking. Others seemed uncomfortable around her, as if her presence was a reminder of dark truths they preferred to ignore. "Martinez," Instructor Rodriguez called out during her first morning back. He was one of the new staff members brought in to replace those under investigation. "You're behind on training. We'll need to evaluate whether you can catch up." Sarah had expected this. Her time in captivity had cost her nearly a week of crucial training, and she could see the physical changes in her fellow recruits. They had grown stronger and more skilled while she had been fighting a different kind of battle. "I understand, sir," she replied. "I'm ready to prove myself." What followed were the most grueling weeks of Sarah's life. She had to make up for lost training time while also dealing with the psychological aftermath of her kidnapping. Nightmares disrupted her sleep, and unexpected sounds would sometimes trigger intense anxiety responses. But she refused to let these challenges slow her down. The other recruits watched in amazement as Sarah pushed herself beyond normal human limits. She would complete her regular training and then stay for extra sessions, working on the skills she had missed. When others were resting, she was running additional miles or practicing underwater navigation until her lungs screamed for air. "She's trying to kill herself," one recruit whispered to another during a break. But Sarah wasn't trying to destroy herself. She was trying to forge herself into something unbreakable. Every extra mile, every additional exercise, every moment of pain was proof that her captors had failed to break her spirit. The instructors began to take notice. At first, they seemed skeptical about her ability to catch up, but gradually their skepticism turned to grudging respect. Sarah wasn't just matching the performance of her classmates. She was beginning to exceed it. During a particularly challenging navigation exercise in hostile terrain, Sarah's team found themselves lost and running out of time. The exercise was designed to test leadership under pressure, and the team leader, a confident recruit named Stevens, was making increasingly poor decisions. "We need to backtrack," Sarah suggested quietly as the team studied their map. "I'm the team leader," Stevens snapped. "We continue forward." Sarah watched as Stevens led them further into dangerous territory. According to their map, they were heading toward a cliff edge that would force them to retreat anyway, costing valuable time. She had a choice: follow orders and let the team fail, or take initiative and risk disciplinary action. "Stevens," she said more firmly, "look at the contour lines. We're walking into a dead end." "I said I'm handling this," he replied, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Sarah made her decision. She stopped walking and pulled out her compass, quickly calculating an alternative route. "The objective is 3 clicks northeast of our current position. If we adjust our heading by 15 degrees and move through that valley, we can reach it in 40 minutes. The other team members looked between Sarah and Stevens, torn between following the designated leader and trusting the person who seemed to know what she was doing. Stevens stared at the map for a long moment, his pride warring with common sense. Finally, he nodded. "Martinez takes point. Move out." Sarah's navigation proved correct, and the team completed their objective with time to spare. As they headed back to base, Stevens approached her privately. "Thanks," he said simply. "I was about to lead us off a cliff." "We're a team," Sarah replied. "Teams look out for each other." Word of Sarah's leadership during the exercise spread quickly among both recruits and instructors. It was a turning point, marking the moment when she stopped being seen as the female recruit who survived kidnapping and started being recognized as simply one of the best recruits in the program. But her success created new challenges. Some of the remaining old guard instructors seemed determined to find ways to disqualify her, scrutinizing her performance with microscopic attention to detail. Others pushed her harder than anyone else, claiming they were ensuring she could handle the real pressures of SEAL operations. During a live-fire exercise, Instructor Hayes deliberately created a scenario designed to test Sarah's combat reflexes under extreme stress. He set up a situation where she would have to make a split-second decision about whether to engage multiple targets while protecting civilian mannequins. "Martinez," he called out as the exercise began. "You have enemy combatants at 12 and 3 o'clock. Civilians at 2 o'clock. What's your move?" Sarah assessed the situation instantly. The targets were positioned to create a crossfire that would endanger the civilians if she engaged from her current position. Instead of taking the obvious shots, she moved laterally, using cover to reposition herself for clean angles of fire. Her shots were precise and controlled. Both targets were neutralized without endangering the civilians, and her movement demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed even Hayes. "Acceptable," Hayes said grudgingly, though several other instructors exchanged approving looks. As training continued, Sarah began to realize that her experience with the kidnapping had given her advantages she hadn't expected. Her tolerance for psychological pressure was now beyond anything the normal training could produce. Situations that broke other recruits barely registered as stressful to someone who had maintained her sanity while being tortured by determined captors. More importantly, she had learned to find strength in the worst possible circumstances. When other recruits complained about the difficulty of their training, Sarah remembered the warehouse and felt grateful for clean water, regular meals, and instructors who were ultimately trying to make her stronger rather than break her completely. The transformation wasn't just physical or mental, it was spiritual. Sarah had discovered something unshakable at her core, a sense of purpose that couldn't be kidnapped or tortured away. She wasn't just training to become a SEAL anymore. She was becoming living proof that strength came in many forms, and that the human spirit could overcome any attempt to cage or diminish it. Her fellow recruits had begun to look to her for guidance during the most challenging exercises. Without being officially designated as a leader, Sarah had become the heart of her training class, the person others turned to when they needed inspiration to continue. As the final phase of training approached, Sarah knew she had already won the most important battle, not against her instructors, not against the system that had tried to exclude her, but against the part of herself that had once wondered if she truly belonged. Now she knew beyond any doubt, she belonged wherever she chose to fight. The final phase of SEAL training was designed to break even the strongest candidates. Known as the Crucible, it combined every skill learned throughout the program into a series of impossible scenarios that tested the absolute limits of human endurance and determination. Sarah entered this phase as one of only 12 remaining candidates from the original class of 43. The others had either rung the bell, been medically disqualified, or been removed for various infractions. Each survivor represented months of brutal conditioning and unwavering commitment. But something had changed in how the program viewed her. The investigation into her kidnapping had revealed that several former candidates had been driven out through similar intimidation tactics, and the military was now determined to ensure fair treatment for all recruits. Sarah found herself under intense scrutiny, not from hostility, but from officials who wanted to prove the system could work. Martinez, Admiral Crawford, addressed her on the first day of the final phase. He was the highest-ranking officer she had encountered, a legend in the Special Forces community. "You understand that completing this training will make history." "I understand that completing this training will make me a SEAL, sir," Sarah replied. "The history part is just a side effect," the Admiral smiled at her response. "Good answer. But you should know that your success or failure will impact every woman who tries to follow in your footsteps. That's a heavy burden to carry." Sarah had thought about this responsibility every day since her rescue. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for future generations of women who dreamed of serving in elite military units. But she had also learned that the weight of expectation could be paralyzing if she focused on it too much. "I can only control my own performance, sir," she said. "I'll make sure it's worthy of the uniform." The final exercises were unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The instructors created scenarios that combined physical exhaustion with complex problem-solving under extreme stress. Candidates were given missions that seemed impossible to complete within the time limits, forced to make decisions with incomplete information while dealing with simulated injuries and equipment failures. During one exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound, retrieving valuable intelligence, and exfiltrating without being detected. The twist was that they had to complete the mission while one team member was wounded and unable to walk. Sarah volunteered to carry the injured teammate, a decision that would make every other aspect of the mission more difficult. As they approached the compound, she realized the extra weight would make it impossible to climb the wall they needed to scale. "Leave me," whispered Johnson, the recruit playing the wounded soldier. "Complete the mission." "No one gets left behind," Sarah replied firmly. She studied the wall for alternatives, noting a drainage pipe that might support their combined weight. It would be dangerous and loud, but it was their only option. The infiltration took longer than planned, and they were running out of time. Sarah had to make split-second decisions about which intelligence to prioritize, knowing that spending too long inside would compromise their escape. She grabbed the most critical documents and led her team toward the exit. Alarms started sounding as they reached the extraction point. Sarah had to choose between taking cover and protecting her wounded teammate, or engaging the guards to create an escape opportunity. She chose engagement, drawing fire while her team moved to safety. When the exercise ended, the instructors gathered to evaluate their performance. Sarah expected criticism for the mission's loud conclusion, but instead found approval for her leadership under pressure and her commitment to team member safety. "Real operations are messy," Instructor Davis explained. Perfect stealth is nice, but bringing everyone home is better. Martinez made the right call. As the exercises continued, Sarah noticed a shift in how her fellow candidates treated her. The last traces of skepticism had disappeared, replaced by genuine respect for her abilities. When teams were formed for collaborative exercises, other candidates actively sought her participation. Martinez has the best tactical sense in the class, she overheard Stevens telling another candidate. Plus, she's been through worse than anything they can throw at us here. The psychological testing during this phase was particularly intense. Candidates were subjected to interrogation scenarios designed to break their resistance and force them to reveal classified information. Sarah's experience with her kidnappers had prepared her for this in ways the instructors didn't expect. When they tried to disorient her with loud noises and bright lights, Sarah drew on her memories of the dark warehouse and found calm within chaos. When they used emotional manipulation, talking about her family and friends, she remembered her captors' similar tactics and refused to be affected. "How are you doing this?" the interrogator asked after hours of failed attempts to break her concentration. "Most candidates crack within the first hour." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I've had practice." The final examination was a solo survival exercise in hostile territory. Each candidate was dropped alone in wilderness with minimal equipment and had to reach a designated extraction point while avoiding capture by hunter teams. The exercise could last up to 5 days, testing every skill learned throughout training. Sarah found herself in dense forest with only basic survival gear and the knowledge that trained professionals were actively hunting her. She had to find food and water, navigate by stars, avoid detection, and reach her goal without being caught. On the second day, she encountered one of the hunter teams. Sarah had been moving carefully through thick underbrush when she heard voices ahead. She froze, recognizing the tactical communication patterns of professional soldiers. These weren't instructors playing a role. They were actual special forces operators brought in to make the exercise as realistic as possible. Sarah had 2 options: retreat and find another route, which would cost valuable time, or attempt to evade the team by moving through their patrol zone. She chose the riskier path, using skills learned through months of training to move silently through terrain that would challenge even experienced woodsmen. The evasion took hours. Sarah had to time her movements with wind patterns to mask any sound, choose her path based on ground conditions that wouldn't leave tracks, and control her breathing to avoid detection. At one point, she lay motionless for over an hour as a searcher passed within feet of her position. When she finally cleared their patrol zone, Sarah felt a surge of confidence that carried her through the remaining days. She had outmaneuvered professional soldiers using nothing but training and determination. The girl who had been mocked in high school was now capable of skills that few people in the world could match. The extraction point was a clearing deep in the mountains, marked only by coordinates that candidates had to reach through dead reckoning navigation. Sarah arrived 12 hours ahead of schedule, having covered the distance faster than any previous candidate, while successfully avoiding all hunter teams. As she waited for pickup, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every person who had told her she couldn't succeed, every instructor who had doubted her capabilities, every moment of pain and exhaustion had contributed to building someone capable of extraordinary things. The helicopter that arrived to extract her carried more than just transportation home. It carried vindication, proof that determination could overcome any obstacle, and hope for every woman who had ever been told her dreams were impossible. When Sarah climbed aboard, the pilot looked at her with undisguised amazement. "You're the one who broke the survival record?" Sarah nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion from 5 days in the wilderness. "Well, I'll be damned," the pilot said with admiration. "They said it couldn't be done." As the helicopter rose above the trees, Sarah looked down at the forest that had tested her limits and found them sufficient. Tomorrow would bring graduation, recognition, and the beginning of a career that would prove women belonged wherever they had the strength to fight. But today, she was simply a warrior heading home after completing an impossible mission. The girl from Texas had become something unbreakable, and the world was about to find out what that meant. The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp morning in front of the Pacific Ocean, with waves crashing against the shore where Sarah had endured countless hours of surf torture during her early training. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. She had been tested by those same waters and emerged stronger. Families gathered on the beach to watch their sons and daughters receive the coveted SEAL trident, the golden pin that represented membership in one of the world's most elite fighting forces. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas, their faces showing a mixture of pride and amazement at what their daughter had accomplished. Admiral Crawford stepped to the podium, his weathered face serious as he addressed the small group of graduates and their families. Behind him stood the 12 candidates who had survived the complete training program, each representing months of struggle and triumph. Today we recognize individuals who have proven themselves capable of extraordinary service to their country, the Admiral began. Each person standing here has demonstrated physical courage, mental toughness, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Sarah stood at attention, feeling the weight of the moment, but also a deep sense of completion. The journey that had begun with mockery in her hometown had culminated in recognition among warriors. She had not only survived every test, but had excelled in ways that surprised even her supporters. The candidates before you represent the future of special operations, Admiral Crawford continued. They will serve in the most dangerous environments on Earth, protecting freedoms that most people take for granted. We ask them to be ready to sacrifice everything, including their lives, for missions they may never be able to discuss. The Admiral's eyes found Sarah in the formation. This class is historically significant not because it breaks barriers, but because it proves that excellence comes in many forms. Petty Officer Martinez has demonstrated that strength of character matters more than any physical attribute or social expectation. As her name was called, Sarah stepped forward to receive her trident. The golden pin felt heavier than she had expected, weighted with the responsibility of representing not just herself, but every woman who might follow in her path. Congratulations, SEAL, Admiral Crawford said as he pinned the trident to her uniform. You've earned your place among warriors. Sarah saluted sharply. Thank you, sir. I'm ready to serve. The ceremony concluded with the traditional bell ringing, but this time the sound represented triumph rather than surrender. Each graduate rang the bell once to signify their completion of training, the same bell that had tempted them to quit during their darkest moments. When Sarah's turn came, she grasped the rope and pulled firmly. The clear tone echoed across the beach, carrying with it the echo of every person who had doubted this moment would come. As the sound faded, she felt a chapter of her life closing and a new one beginning. After the ceremony, reporters gathered around Sarah, eager to capture the historic moment. She had become the first woman to complete Navy SEAL training, but she was careful to keep the focus on capability rather than gender. What message do you have for other women considering special operations careers? One reporter asked. Sarah thought carefully before answering. Don't let anyone else define your limitations. The only person who can determine what you're capable of is you. Train hard, stay focused on your goals, and remember that earning respect is better than demanding it. Do you feel pressure to represent all women in the military? I feel pressure to be the best SEAL I can be, Sarah replied. My success or failure reflects on me, not on an entire gender. Women are individuals with different strengths and capabilities just like men. The questions continued, but Sarah kept her responses focused on the future rather than dwelling on past obstacles. She had learned that looking backward for too long could prevent someone from moving forward effectively. As the media attention wound down, Sarah found herself alone with her parents for the first time in months. Her father, the retired Marine who had always believed in her potential, had tears in his eyes as he looked at her uniform. I'm proud of you, he said simply, not because you proved anyone wrong, but because you proved yourself right. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, I was so scared for you. When we heard about the kidnapping, I know, Mom, Sarah replied, but that experience taught me something important. I'm stronger than I ever imagined, and I can handle whatever comes next. Within days of graduation, Sarah received her first assignment. She would be joining SEAL Team 3, deploying to overseas operations where her training would be tested in real-world scenarios. The missions would be classified, dangerous, and crucial to national security. Her new teammates welcomed her with professional respect. They had all heard about her training performance and her resistance to the kidnapping ordeal. In the special operations community, reputation was earned through actions, and Sarah's actions had spoken clearly. Martinez, her team leader, Lieutenant Commander Peterson addressed her during their first briefing. You'll be our communications specialist and backup medic. The jobs aren't assigned because you're a woman. They're assigned because you scored highest in those areas during training. Sarah nodded, appreciating the straightforward approach. Understood, sir. When do we deploy? 2 weeks, Peterson replied. We'll spend that time integrating you into the team and familiarizing you with our specific procedures. Once we're downrange, there won't be time for learning curves. The training period with her new team was intensive but different from SEAL school. These men had already proven themselves in combat, and they were focused on mission effectiveness rather than testing her resolve. Sarah found herself appreciated for her technical skills and tactical thinking, rather than being judged for her gender. During a practice mission, Sarah demonstrated the leadership abilities that had emerged during her final training exercises. When communications with their support team failed during a simulated raid, she quickly established alternative contact methods and coordinated extraction under pressure. Good thinking. Martinez, Peterson said after the exercise. That's the kind of adaptability we need in the field. As deployment approached, Sarah received messages from around the world. Women in military services from various countries sent congratulations and encouragement. Young girls wrote letters saying they wanted to be SEALs when they grew up. Former classmates who had once mocked her dreams reached out with apologies and admiration. But the most meaningful message came from Marcus Thompson, her friend who had washed out of training during her kidnapping ordeal. He had joined the regular Navy and was serving with distinction on a destroyer. I heard about your graduation, he wrote. I always knew you had what it takes. My failure wasn't your fault, and your success inspires me to keep pushing my own boundaries. The SEALs got themselves a real warrior. On her last night before deployment, Sarah stood on the beach where she had endured so much pain and growth during training. The waves that had once been her enemy now seemed like old friends, carrying whispers of challenges overcome and strength discovered. She thought about the girl who had left Texas with dreams bigger than her hometown could understand. That girl had been brave but untested, determined but unproven. The woman standing on this beach had been forged in fires that would have destroyed weaker spirits. Tomorrow, she would begin using her skills to protect people who would never know her name or understand the sacrifices made on their behalf. She would face dangers that couldn't be discussed and complete missions that would never appear in history books. It was exactly what she had always wanted. Sarah Martinez was no longer the girl who dreamed of becoming a SEAL. She was a SEAL, ready to prove that excellence in special operations came from the strength of one's character rather than the accident of one's birth. The mocking voices from her past had been silenced by the reality of her achievement, and the future stretched before her filled with opportunities to demonstrate what a true warrior could accomplish. The tide was coming in, washing away footprints in the sand and preparing the beach for tomorrow's challenges. Sarah smiled and headed back to base, ready to serve her country as one of its elite protectors. She had reminded everyone what a SEAL was truly made of: unbreakable determination, unwavering courage, and the refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. Her story was no longer about breaking barriers. It was about what happened when barriers were broken and excellence was allowed to flourish without artificial constraints. The real mission was just beginning.